Fazila's world had always been small, fragile, and filled with fleeting moments of innocence. She lived in a congested slum with her mother, where dusty lanes, makeshift roofs, and street-side games were all she had ever known. Her only dream was to finish school someday and perhaps wear a clean uniform without patches. But dreams are a luxury in places like hers. Easily sold, easily broken. Her mother worked as a housemaid in a grand mansion on the other side of the city. For years, she had been cleaning, cooking, and scrubbing for the same rich family. One day, when her mother fell ill, Fazila had to accompany her. Not out of choice, but because survival left no room for rest. Fazila's first step into that bungalow felt like walking into another world. Marble floors, golden chandeliers, and complete silence. Her mother assigned her the task of sweeping rooms. Hesitantly, she moved from corridor to corridor, reaching a large bedroom that seemed untouched by dust. She entered quietly, unaware that the bathroom door was slightly ajar. Suddenly, the bathroom door swung open. A tall man in his 40s walked out, barely covered by a towel. Fazila froze. The mop in her hand trembled. The man, startled at first, said nothing, he simply stared. Fazila fled, her heartbeat louder than her footsteps. 2 days later, her mother sat her down and said, "Fazila, you're very lucky. That man, Mr. Najam, the owner of this house, he has asked for your hand in marriage." Fazila blinked in disbelief. "Marriage? But I'm still in school. I'm only 14. Her mother, exhausted yet excited, cupped her face. "Don't be foolish. He's rich. You'll become the lady of this house. You'll never have to clean again." Fazila's refusal didn't matter. Her voice was too soft, her resistance too weak. When her father found out, a man who rarely came home sober, he laughed and clapped his hands like he'd won a lottery. "2 lakhs, can you believe it?" he roared. "We'll finally move out of this hellhole, and my daughter will live in a palace." "But I'm not for sale," Fazila whispered that night in her sleep, though no one was listening. Within a week, everything changed. A small ceremony was held. No music, no friends, no joy. Just silence, like a warning no one heard. Fazila, dressed in a borrowed red dress, arrived at the mansion as a bride. Everyone called her lucky. She didn't feel lucky. She felt sold. That night, she waited on the edge of a grand bed she had never imagined herself sitting on. Her hands trembled. The air felt too cold. When the door opened and Najam entered, her heart nearly stopped. But it wasn't just Najam. He wasn't alone. Beside him was a large black dog, regal, imposing, and completely out of place in a bridal suite. The animal's dark eyes glinted in the dim light. Fazila instinctively pulled her scarf over her face. "Please," she whispered. "Can you take the dog out? I'm scared of dogs." Najam laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Scared? But this is just the beginning," he said. "Everything in this house, every inch of this wealth, comes with him." Fazila didn't understand what he meant, but something about the way he smiled, as if hiding something far more dangerous behind those words, Abbas saying, sent a chill down her spine. That night was not what she expected. Not as a bride, not as a girl, and unknown to her, this was just the first thread in a terrifying web she was about to be caught in. The next morning, Fazila woke up disoriented, lying on an enormous bed with gold embroidery she didn't recognize. Sunlight slipped quietly through the sheer curtains, casting golden patterns on the floor. Najam hadn't returned that night. Her heart felt lighter for that reason alone. Still, confusion gnawed at her. Who brings a dog into a bridal suite and leaves without a word? A gentle knock on the bedroom door startled her. It was her mother, who had arrived early to resume work at the mansion. Fazila ran into her arms, breathless and shaken. "Something's wrong," she whispered. "Najam, he brought a dog into the room last night. A huge black one. I was terrified, and he seemed completely fine with it, like it was normal." Her mother chuckled softly, brushing her daughter's hair back. "Oh, darling. Wealthy people have strange habits. Their pets are like their family. You'll get used to it. If you want to win his affection, you'll need to accept what he loves. But it didn't feel normal, Fazila muttered, trying to find the right words. Her mother's tone grew firmer. This is your home now. You've been given what most girls from our neighborhood never dream of. Don't create trouble for yourself. Be grateful. Be obedient. Fazila lowered her eyes. Gratitude. That word was already becoming a chain around her neck. By afternoon, Najam returned. He walked in casually, as though everything was perfectly fine. He smiled, bringing her a light blue dress wrapped in tissue paper and a pair of sparkling heels. I'm sorry for last night, he said. A friend had an emergency and I had to step out. I didn't want to leave you alone. I hope this makes up for it. Fazila nodded quietly, still too unsettled to speak. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to hope that maybe everything would settle now. That the dog was just a strange quirk. But her hope shattered the moment a house servant entered, holding the leash of the same large black dog. Najam's face lit up like a child seeing his favorite toy. Here he is, he said cheerfully. This is Shadow. He's part of the family. You'll learn to love him too. The dog rushed forward and sat beside her, his eyes locked on her like a silent warning. Fazila froze, heart thudding. She tried not to show her fear. Najam leaned closer and said, He'll be staying close from now on. He protects what's mine. She forced a weak smile. Resistance didn't feel safe. She said nothing. That evening, Najam had another surprise. We're taking a short honeymoon trip, he announced, waving 2 train tickets. Just you and me. Time to get to know each other better. Panic rose in Fazila's chest. She barely knew him. She didn't know how to behave like a wife, especially not with someone who made her so uneasy. But saying no was not an option. She packed the bag he handed her, quietly obeying. They left around noon. The ride was long, with Najam humming unfamiliar songs and glancing at her through the mirror. The worst moment came when he placed the dog gently into the back seat, buckling him in as if he were another passenger. Hours later, the car turned down a remote gravel path leading to a secluded farmhouse. It was surrounded by tall trees and silence. The kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful but watchful. This is our little escape, Najam said, opening the car door for her. No distractions here. Inside, the house was eerily clean, but completely lifeless, like a stage set up for a scene no one was ready for. Najam led her to a bedroom. The curtains were drawn, candles flickered on side tables. A wardrobe stood in the corner. He opened it, pulled out a delicate silk dress, short, revealing, and handed it to her. Put this on tonight, he said gently. It's our honeymoon. Fazila's hands trembled. I'm not comfortable with... He cut her off. My happiness is your responsibility now. Didn't your parents teach you that? He smiled as he left the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Outside, the dog sat silently, alert, still, and far too human in its awareness. Fazila clutched the dress, standing in the middle of a stranger's bedroom, trying to breathe in a life that no longer felt like her own. The room smelled of fresh lavender and something heavier, something she couldn't name. It lingered in the air like an unspoken threat. Fazila stood motionless, staring at the silk dress in her hands. The fabric shimmered like moonlight but felt like fire against her palms. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to resist, to scream. But where would she go? Who would hear her in the middle of nowhere? The farmhouse was isolated, and Najam held all the keys, literally and metaphorically. Minutes passed. She couldn't tell how many. She just knew the sun had dipped beyond the horizon. When Najam knocked and called her name, his voice was soft, but she felt the pressure behind it. Are you ready? He asked. Her throat was dry. I need more time. He didn't respond. Instead, he slowly pushed the door open. She stepped back instinctively, clutching the dress to her chest. Najam's smile was tight. You don't have to be afraid. I'm not a monster, but you need to understand. My world, my rules. Fazila didn't reply. Silence had become her only form of defense. Najam glanced at the untouched dress. You know, happiness is a choice, he said. Especially for someone like you. You've been given a palace, a husband, a future. Isn't that enough? Before she could answer, there was a rustle outside the room. The door creaked further open as the large black dog walked in, slowly and silently, as if summoned by an invisible cue. It moved with eerie calm and sat beside Najm, staring at her again. Najm bent down, ruffled the dog's head, and said, "She's still nervous, but she'll come around." Fazila's body stiffened. She didn't understand this dynamic. The way Najm spoke to the dog like a person, the way the dog responded without a sound, there was something unnatural about it, something deeply wrong. Najm approached and gently handed her the dress again. "Change into this. I'll wait outside." His voice was soft, but the undertone was clear. There was no room for refusal. With trembling hands, Fazila took the dress and walked into the adjoining bathroom. The mirror reflected a version of herself she barely recognized. A child dressed in fear. Her eyes wide and red-rimmed, her lips trembling. When she finally returned, the dress clinging awkwardly to her small frame, Najm was no longer alone. There was another man in the room now. Fazila froze in place. He was tall, wearing a leather jacket and holding a black bag in one hand. His gaze swept over her like a scan. He smirked and turned to Najm. "You weren't lying. She's very young." Najm chuckled. "Fresh and untouched, just the way they want." Fazila's heart dropped. She took a step back, her hands moving to cover herself. The man set the bag down and unzipped it. From inside, he pulled out a camera. Professional, heavy, and ominous in its silence. Najm walked over to the dog, who hadn't moved from his corner. "Stay alert, boy," he said. Then he looked at Fazila. "This is Khalid. He's a filmmaker. Don't be scared. You just need to follow instructions." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "Why?" she finally managed to whisper. "What is this?" Najm's expression hardened slightly. "Don't ruin this with drama. Just smile when you're told. Do what's asked. It's not personal, it's just business." Fazila felt her knees weaken. The air had turned into ice. She realized she wasn't a wife. She was a product, a transaction, a performance. The camera light blinked on. The red dot began to glow, and Fazila's soul began to dim. The red recording light glowed like an open wound in the darkened room. Fazila stood frozen, a statue of fear, while Khalid adjusted the camera's lens. Every click, every beep made her flinch. She felt like a captive bird, trapped in a cage built with silence and money. Najm stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, observing her closely. He looked not like a husband, but like a director watching his actor before a scene. The air was thick with quiet menace. "Relax," he said softly. "This is nothing. It's just a trial. If you do well, everything will become easier." Khalid chimed in, positioning the camera at an angle. "Don't look scared, just smile. Pretend it's a normal photo shoot." Fazila could barely breathe, let alone smile. The presence of the dog, sitting near the door with its head tilted, only added to her horror. Najm gestured toward it casually, as if signaling a prop to take its place. "Start with something simple," he told Khalid. "We'll build it up slowly." Khalid nodded and moved behind the camera. "Ready in 3, 2. Fazila took a step back. "No," she said firmly, for the first time in hours. "I don't want this." Najm's expression didn't change, but his voice did. "You're making this harder than it has to be." "This isn't right," she cried. "You told my parents you'd give me a home. You promised me a marriage, not—" He stepped forward suddenly, his tone sharp. "They sold you for 2 lakhs. That's all I paid. Don't confuse this with a fairy tale. This is reality. You're here for a reason." Her breath caught, her knees buckled. That sentence tore through her like glass. She had always suspected it, but hearing it aloud crushed something inside her forever. Khalid hesitated. "Should I stop recording?" Najm shook his head. "Let it run. She'll break. They always do." The room spun. Fazila turned toward the door instinctively, but the dog stood up and blocked her path. Najm stepped in front of her again, voice now dangerously calm. "You think you're the first? I've done this dozens of times. girls from poor homes, sold with blessings and a signature. Your story isn't new, and it won't be the last. She stared at him stunned. You've done this to others? 40, maybe more, he said proudly. You see this house, this land, that car outside? All of it came from what you're refusing to do. Khalid looked uncomfortable. Maybe she's too young. This could backfire. She's the perfect age, Najam replied coldly. That's what makes her valuable. Fazila trembled, the walls closing in around her. Her chest heaved as she tried to hold back tears. Every sound, every whisper, every footstep echoed with cruelty. I won't do it, she whispered, backing into a corner. You can't make me. Najam narrowed his eyes. You have two options: cooperate or be forced. Khalid lowered the camera. Najam, this isn't going well. Maybe we try again later. Najam exhaled through clenched teeth. After a long pause, he nodded. Fine. Pause the shoot. Khalid turned off the camera, the red light finally disappearing. But its glow had already imprinted itself in Fazila's memory. Najam looked at her one last time. Think about it. You can make this easy. Or you can make it ugly. Either way, it's happening. As he and Khalid left the room, the dog remained behind, watching her like a shadow given life. Fazila curled up in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, trembling. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow, but she had survived tonight, for now. The night passed slowly. Fazila stayed curled in the corner of the room, too frightened to sleep, too drained to cry. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the red light blinking, Najam's expressionless face, and the camera lens staring like a watchful eye. Morning light eventually filtered through the curtains, but it didn't feel like a new day, only a continuation of a nightmare that refused to end. There was a knock at the door. She stiffened, heart racing. Najam's voice followed, oddly calm. Get ready. We're having breakfast together. You need your strength. She said nothing. After a few minutes, the door opened anyway. Najam stepped inside, dressed in a pressed white shirt, acting as if nothing had happened the night before. He walked over to her with a tray of food and placed it on the table. I brought your favorites, he said, as if they had ever spoken about her favorites. Eat. You'll feel better. She stared at the food. Toast, eggs, tea. All of it looked warm, but it made her stomach twist. I'm not hungry, she muttered. He pulled up a chair and sat across from her. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Fazila. I'm not your enemy. I gave your family what they needed. I gave you comfort. And all I ask for in return is your cooperation. My family didn't know, she whispered. He smirked. Didn't they? Your father signed the agreement. He took the money without blinking. Do you really think people like you get fairy tale marriages? That sentence landed like a slap. She turned her head away, blinking back the tears. Najam leaned forward slightly. I'm giving you one last chance to act like a partner. If you do, you'll live like a queen. If you don't, you'll still do what I say. But it will hurt more. Fazila's silence deepened. Najam stood up, frustration flashing across his face. Think about it, he said coldly before walking out and locking the door behind him. Hours passed. She remained inside, her thoughts spiraling. The house was quiet again, too quiet. She thought of running, of screaming, but they were far from any town. And even if she escaped the building, where would she go? As evening approached, she heard voices outside the door, another visitor. Moments later, Khalid entered again, alone this time, carrying a laptop and camera bag. He looked at her differently now, less bold than the night before. Najam wasn't far behind. He gave Khalid a nod, then turned to Fazila. This time, he said, you will not resist. If you do, I'll make sure it's worse. Understand? She said nothing. Khalid looked hesitant. Are you sure about this? She's not stable. Najam laughed. She'll adjust. They always do. Just then, a sudden noise interrupted them. A loud crash from the hallway. The dog had broken free from its leash and sprinted into the room, growling. But this time, it wasn't calm. Its eyes were wild, unfocused. It lunged at Najam, biting into his leg with terrifying force. Najam screamed. Khalid jumped back, horrified. Blood soaked Najam's trousers as he tried to kick the dog away. It bit again. This time at his arm, ripping skin and tearing fabric. "Get it off me!" Najam shouted, eyes wide with panic. A servant rushed in, trying to pull the animal away. It took 3 men to restrain it, finally dragging it out, still snarling. Fazila stood in the corner, stunned. Her heart was racing, not with fear but disbelief. Najam collapsed on the floor, gasping, his white shirt now stained with red. The room was filled with shouts, chaos, and blood. Fazila didn't move, she just watched. For the first time, Najam looked vulnerable. And for the first time, Fazila didn't feel like prey. Something was shifting. Something had broken. And it wasn't her. The farmhouse echoed with the sound of chaos. Servants shouted over each other, trying to clean up the blood while holding Najam steady. He was in agony, his face twisted in pain, his shirt clinging to his blood-soaked skin. Khalid stood in a corner, pale and shaken, unsure whether to help or run. Fazila remained still, watching it all unfold like a silent witness to justice. Her hands were cold, but her heart pounded with something unfamiliar. Power? Relief? She couldn't name it, but she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of Najam, not of the dog, and not of what might come next. The only words Najam could manage between groans were, "Call the doctor, quickly, I'm not feeling right." But they were in the middle of nowhere. The nearest clinic was hours away. A servant called for help, pacing nervously with a phone against his ear. Another tried to wrap a towel around Najam's leg to stop the bleeding. His other arm, swollen and torn, hung limp by his side. Within an hour, Najam began shaking violently. His lips foamed and his eyes darted around wildly. He screamed without warning, then laughed, then growled like an animal. He tried to get up, but stumbled into the wall, knocking over a lamp. The doctor arrived 3 hours later, panting and drenched in sweat. He took one look at Najam's state and turned grim. "This isn't just trauma," the doctor muttered. "He's showing signs of neurological breakdown." "What does that mean?" Khalid asked, his voice trembling. "It means," the doctor said, "he may have contracted rabies." The room went silent. Even the servants froze. "What?" Khalid whispered. The doctor stood and pulled off his gloves. "Has this animal been vaccinated? Has he shown strange behavior before?" The servant shook his head. "He was medicated often. Special supplements. They said it helped with breeding aggression." The doctor's expression turned dark. "If this dog was being chemically altered, there's no telling what kind of infection he's carrying." "Your friend," he said, glancing toward Najam, "may not survive." Fazila's eyes widened. Najam lay on the floor, convulsing, his voice turning into slurred shrieks. At times, he spoke in fragments. At times, he barked like he wasn't human anymore. Foam lined the corners of his mouth. The doctor called for an emergency transfer, but it was too late. The virus had entered his nervous system, and once that happened, there was no way back. By evening, Najam was locked in a separate room, restrained with straps to prevent him from harming anyone else. He screamed endlessly, cursed in languages Fazila didn't know, and begged for mercy from shadows that didn't exist. Khalid stood in the hallway, shell-shocked. "This isn't possible. This can't be happening. He's going mad." Fazila walked up behind him. "Isn't madness what he always carried inside?" Khalid turned, startled by her calm voice. He had never heard her speak so directly. "He made people suffer," she continued. "He sold girls, ruined lives. Now he's being devoured by the very creature he used." Khalid said nothing. "He said my pain would make him rich," she whispered. "But look at him now." For the first time, Khalid couldn't deny what he had been part of. He had filmed it, enabled it, taken the money. But now it felt like blood on his hands. Fazila stared through the glass at Najam, thrashing on the hospital-style bed. His screams echoed down the hallway. And she realized something. This wasn't the end of her nightmare. But maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of his. The farmhouse was quiet again, but it was no longer peaceful. The air hung thick with fear, guilt, and the distant sound of Najam's muffled cries from behind a locked door. The man who once orchestrated horrors was now reduced to a shadow of himself, bound, drooling, and delirious from a disease for which no cure existed. Fazila sat on the edge of a small couch in the hallway, her eyes hollow but alert. She hadn't eaten in a day. Her stomach was empty, but her soul felt heavier than ever. Every moment in that house now felt like borrowed time. Across the hallway, Khalid stood near a window, his back turned to her. The camera bag he had once proudly carried was now shoved into a corner, untouched since the attack. He hadn't said much since the doctor left, but Fazila could sense something shifting in him. At last, he spoke. "I didn't sign up for this," he said quietly. I thought I was just documenting, just following instructions." She didn't answer. There were no words gentle enough to excuse his role. "I didn't know he was using you like that," Khalid added. "Not like this. I knew there were girls before, but I never asked questions. He paid well. I thought that was enough." Fazila turned her gaze toward him. "You didn't need to ask. You could see it." He winced. She was right. Khalid turned to face her. His face looked older now, like guilt had carved years into his expression. "After what happened to him, it scared me. I think it's punishment. I think God saw everything he did and finally said, 'Enough.'" Silence stretched between them. Then Khalid took a hesitant step forward. "The footage. It hasn't been uploaded. It's still in the memory card. I haven't shared it anywhere. If you want me to, I can destroy it." Fazila didn't blink. "Then do it." He nodded and walked to the corner where the bag sat. Slowly, with trembling hands, he pulled out the memory card and held it over a candle on the table. As the plastic began to melt and curl, a faint crackling sound filled the room, like a kenitiye ruined her life. When it was done, he dropped the remains into a glass of water. "I'm sorry," he said. Fazila didn't forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But something about that act, like small as it was, brought a flicker of closure. One less nightmare to chase her. That night, Khalid slept in the hallway outside Najam's room as if to atone for his silence. He didn't touch his camera again. Inside the locked room, Najam was losing touch with reality. He called out names no one knew, begged for light in a fully lit room, and screamed about shadows crawling on the ceiling. His body jerked without control. His mind, once so calculating, was now undone. The doctor had said there was no cure, no treatment. He would only get worse. Fazila watched from a distance. Part of her was terrified that he might somehow recover, come back, and continue what he started. But another part, the part that had survived so much, knew this was the unraveling of something dark. She wasn't just witnessing the fall of a man, she was witnessing the end of a monster. And in that silence, after everything he had done, no one wept for him. Not even the dog the following morning brought with it an eerie calm. The fog outside the farmhouse drifted like ghosts past the windows, and inside, silence lay over everything, like a burial shroud. Najam's cries had grown weaker overnight, less human, more broken. The virus had done what no prison, no law, and no confrontation ever could. It had reduced a predator to nothing. Fazila stood in front of a window, arms folded tightly around her chest. She had not cried, not since the day she arrived, but today she felt something stir within her. Not sadness, not joy, but something else. Resolve. Khalid approached quietly. His footsteps were hesitant, as if every step needed permission. "He's not going to last long," he said. "The doctor was right. His body is shutting down." Fazila didn't respond. "I know it's not enough," he added, destroying the footage, saying sorry. "It doesn't erase what I allowed. But I'm done with all of it." He placed something on the table beside her, a thick brown envelope. "What's this?" she asked without looking at him. "Everything," he said. "All the evidence. Contacts, names, transaction records. It's his whole operation." I saved it in case something went wrong one day. And it did. She finally turned to face him. Her eyes weren't filled with rage or forgiveness, only clarity. You can take this to the police, Khalid continued, or the press, or burn it. But this can expose everything he built. Fazila stared at the envelope. It was heavier than paper. It was truth, finally placed in her hands. And what about you? She asked. You were part of it. I'll go to the authorities too, he said without hesitation. I'll confess. I'll face whatever comes. I don't deserve freedom if I helped cage others. She nodded once. Khalid took a shaky breath. After this, I'm leaving. I don't want money. I don't want forgiveness. I just want to make it right. That evening, Fazila walked the perimeter of the farmhouse, breathing the cold air deeply. For the first time in days, she felt like the sky was real, like the earth under her feet belonged to her again. Later, she returned to the room where Najm was being kept. The lock clicked open under her hand. The stench of antiseptic and sweat hung in the air. Najm lay restrained, his eyes wide open but empty. He didn't even recognize her anymore. Fazila stepped closer. This isn't justice, she said softly. But it's something. Najm blinked slowly, as if trying to remember who she was. But the words didn't come. His voice had long since vanished into delirium. She didn't touch him. She didn't scream. She only looked, one final time, at the man who had stolen so much. And she realized something important. He couldn't hurt her anymore. She turned and left, closing the door behind her gently as if sealing a grave. That night, she and Khalid lit a fire in the backyard. She opened the envelope, stared at its contents one last time, and then fed each document into the flames. It wasn't to protect Najm. It was to release herself. The fire hissed, devouring every name, every number, every proof of the crimes she had survived. She didn't need evidence to remember. Her soul had already recorded everything. When the flames died, Fazila looked up at the stars, vast, distant, and silent, and whispered, "It's over." And for the first time since her wedding night, she meant it. 3 days after the fire, Najm's life came to an end. There was no ceremony, no mourning, just a silent death behind locked doors, witnessed only by the doctor and 2 exhausted servants. His body was taken away quietly in the back of a van, not to a grand funeral, but to an unmarked grave paid for in haste. The man who once flaunted power and wealth had departed this world in isolation, with no one to claim him. Fazila didn't shed a tear. She had already buried him in her mind long before his body left the house. As Najm's legal wife, the estate automatically transferred to her. It was a technicality, one that shocked Khalid and baffled the lawyer who visited the farmhouse the following day. But Najm had never imagined his downfall. He left no will, no children, no one else to inherit. Everything he had, his accounts, his cars, his sprawling mansion in the city, now belonged to the very girl he had tried to destroy. Fazila stood in the grand hallway of Najm's city residence, staring at the massive portrait that hung over the fireplace. It was a painting of him in a gray suit, hand on his dog's head, pride etched across his face. She walked up, took a deep breath, and pulled it down from the wall. It crashed to the marble floor, the glass shattering like the illusion he once lived behind. Khalid, now a silent shadow in her life, stood nearby. What will you do with all this? She looked around the mansion, the chandeliers, the polished floors, the untouched wealth. Use it, she replied. Not for me, for others like me. Over the next few weeks, Fazila worked like someone possessed. She hired a small legal team and donated portions of the estate to orphanages and shelters for abused girls. She set up a private trust in her name with a single purpose: to fund education and vocational training for vulnerable young women. The mansion became something else entirely. Not a place of nightmares, but a refuge. The rooms were cleared, the walls repainted, the spaces reimagined. The same halls where silence once screamed now echoed with the sound of laughter and books flipping open. She named the place the Second Light, because every girl deserved one chance to rise again. Fazila never returned to her parents. They had sold her under the illusion of security and hope. To her, they were as lost as Najm, blinded by poverty, perhaps, but complicit nonetheless. But she didn't hate them anymore. She simply chose to outgrow the part of herself that had once waited for their apology. Khalid, true to his word, turned himself in. He confessed to the authorities and accepted the legal consequences of his involvement. Fazila never intervened. Some debts had to be paid in full. Before he left, he visited the second light one last time. He stood at the front gate watching a group of girls planting trees in the courtyard. "Thank you," he said. Fazila looked him in the eye. "Not for what you did, but for what you chose to undo." He nodded and walked away without asking for forgiveness. That night, Fazila sat on the rooftop of the mansion, her feet dangling off the edge. The wind was soft, the city lights distant. In her lap was a notebook, her own story, scribbled page by page, not for the world, but for her own healing. She didn't write the word victim anywhere. She wrote survivor. Then she scratched that out too, and simply wrote, "I lived." Years passed. The mansion that once stood as a symbol of control had transformed into a sanctuary of hope. The chandeliers still glittered, but now they lit up classrooms, not corridors of silence. Desks replaced lounges, laughter filled staircases. Walls once used to trap were now lined with hand-painted murals, each one created by the girls who lived, healed, and grew there. The world outside knew it simply as the second light. But for those who walked its halls, it was more than a building. It was proof that broken things could become beautiful again. Fazila had changed too. Her eyes still carried shadows, but no longer fear. Her voice had become steady, unwavering, the voice of a woman who had faced the darkest abyss and returned stronger. She never wore the scars openly, but she didn't hide them either. One summer afternoon, she stood before a crowd of students, educators, journalists, and social workers. She had been invited to speak at an international conference on gender-based violence and digital exploitation. Her story had spread quietly, not through tabloids, but through impact. Survivors had started seeking her out. Institutions had begun to listen. Dressed simply in white, Fazila stood at the podium. The room was silent. "I was 14, she began. When I was told I was lucky, that marrying a wealthy man meant I had escaped poverty. But that was a lie. I wasn't married, I was sold." Gasps echoed softly in the room. She didn't flinch. "My story is not just mine. It belongs to every girl who was silenced by fear, dismissed by poverty, and hidden behind walls." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the audience. "We live in a world where crimes can be streamed, where abuse is recorded before it's punished, but silence helps no one. That's why I speak." She shared nothing graphic, no details that would harm. But she gave voice to the pattern, the method, the manipulation, the betrayal that began with trust and ended in trauma. "And yet," she said finally, "I am not a victim. I am not even a survivor. I am proof that no chain, no matter how strong, is permanent." Applause erupted. Some in the room had tears in their eyes. Others looked stunned, but no one remained unmoved. That night, Fazila returned to the second light. She walked the halls barefoot, greeting the girls, many of whom now taught younger ones, managed offices, or painted the walls with stories of triumph. In the garden stood a small sculpture, a phoenix rising from ash. One of the residents had crafted it from broken marble pieces found in the old basement. Fazila smiled every time she saw it. Later in her office, she opened a drawer and pulled out a letter, one she'd written to her younger self. It read, "You were never meant to be quiet. You were never born to obey darkness. You are fire. You are light. You are free." She placed the letter back in the drawer, next to a second one, this one unopened, addressed to the girl who comes after me. She knew someone would need it one day. And when they did, they wouldn't walk into this place as a victim. They would walk in with a broken past and walk out with a future. Because Fazila had broken the cycle, not just for herself, but for every girl still waiting to live.